On 24 August 1217, off Sandwich, a French ship was carrying more than men. It carried siege gear, money, nobles, and the one sea captain Louis of France could not easily replace. Then the English got to windward. The record says they threw lime. Not as a symbol, not as a miracle first, as a weapon. Powder crossed the deck. Men could not see. Grappling irons went over the side. The ship of Eustace the Monk was surrounded, boarded, searched, and taken. This is the story of how one convoy, one hired sea captain, and a few pots of lime helped break a French claim to the English throne. The central question is not only how a pirate admiral died on his own deck, it is why a civil war in England turned on pots of lime in the wind. To answer that, the case has to start before the battle, with a kingdom that did not yet know whether it belonged to a boy named Henry or to a prince named Louis. King John had died the previous October. His son Henry III was 9 years old. The regent was William Marshal, an old soldier trying to hold together a broken royal cause. Across the water, Louis of France had already come to England with rebel barons behind him in London in his hands. By the spring of 1217, the war had two fronts. On land, the royalists had won at Lincoln. At sea, Louis still had a route open from France to London. That route mattered because a claimant with no supply line is only a claimant for as long as his men can eat. Blanche of Castile, Louis's wife, worked from Calais to send reinforcements. The chroniclers described ships, knights, soldiers, money, equipment, and cargo. They do not agree cleanly on the counts. One account gives a smaller fighting fleet. Another gives nearly 80 vessels of different sizes. A third image and text tradition gives still another shape. Keep 5 roles in view. Eustace is the maritime specialist. Louis is the political claim. Henry III and William Marshal are the English royal side. Blanche is the French logistics line. The chroniclers are the record keepers, and they disagree in useful ways. That disagreement is not a problem to hide. It is a warning. Medieval naval battles were often remembered through the side that won, copied by clerks who cared more about providence and politics than tonnage. So this episode will not pretend the fleet was one tidy number. The safe fact is sharper. A French convoy was crossing from Calais toward the Thames, and the English knew what losing that convoy would mean. The convoy's commander was Eustace the Monk. He was not useful because he was loyal. He was useful because he could move violence across water. The records and later romance agree on the outline of a restless career. Monk, local officer, outlaw, sea raider, royal servant, French servant. The exact early adventures belong mostly to the romance. The political usefulness is better documented. John of England had used Eustace. Philip Augustus of France later used him. In 1217, Louis depended on what Eustace could do: gather ships, move men, and carry a convoy through the Channel. When Eustace was captured, even his own offer tells the story. He promised money and then promised future service to the English king. That is the first position I am going to take on the record. The chroniclers hated Eustace, but their hatred preserves the mechanism. They call him traitor and pirate because the same skill had been hired by both sides. In a modern story, changing sides can look like a character flaw. In this case, it was also a job description. The Channel did not have a permanent Royal Navy waiting at anchor. Kings needed mariners who already had ships, crews, knowledge of tides, and a willingness to fight outside clean legal categories. In plain terms, Eustace was a fleet you could hire. The English response gathered at the Cinque Ports, the coastal towns whose ships and sailors had their own stake in the war. The Histoire says the Royalists assembled at Sandwich and entered 18 large ships and several smaller boats. Roger of Wendover's English translation gives Philip d'Aubigny and John Marshall watching the sea with the sailors of the Cinque Ports. Matthew Paris's added tradition brings Hubert de Burgh into the scene, preparing to meet the convoy from Dover. The names differ by emphasis. The pressure does not. If the French ships reached London, Louis received fresh armed men and material after Lincoln. If the English stopped them, the war changed from invasion to negotiation. Here is the deck plan the episode keeps returning to. A heavy French vessel, nobles and knights on board, a siege engine or bulky war gear in the load, smaller vessels around it, English ships coming in with the wind where they needed it. Lime held until the moment it could cross the gap. The lime pots are the case in miniature. They are not heroic. They are not decorative. They are a reminder that a medieval naval battle could be decided by position, weather, and what one crew had ready to throw. The French convoy sailed on St. Bartholomew's Day. The Histoire names the day in French, places Blanche's men leaving Calais, and says they sailed toward the mouth of the Thames. It names Eustace's ship and places Robert of Courtenay aboard it with other knights. Then near Thanet and Sandwich, the royalists came out. Wendover's account says the English approached obliquely. That word matters. This was not a flat collision between two lines on a painted sea. The English were trying to take wind and angle to arrive where the French ships were most vulnerable. The French seemed to have expected one thing and met another. Matthew Paris's added version says Hubert's ships appeared to be steering toward Calais. Eustace read the move one way. Then the English altered course when the wind shifted in their favor. No one needs invented dialogue here. The tactical point is strong enough without it. The English wanted the weather gauge. When they had it, lime became a distance weapon. Wendover's line is blunt. The English threw hot lime dust, and the wind carried it into French eyes. The Histoire says the English attacked Eustace's ship with stones and lime, dazzling the men aboard. The romance written after the event as legend keeps the same physical detail and turns it into a moral image. The powder fills the eyes, the English board, Eustace is killed, and the battle ends. The legend says the powder becomes almost providential. The records say something colder. Lime worked because the English had the wind. That is the myth versus record beat in this case. The romance is not useless. It preserves how the story wanted to feel soon after Eustace's death. But the contemporary and near-contemporary accounts show a tactic before they show a lesson. The lime was not the meaning of the battle, it was the method. Once the powder crossed the deck, the battle narrowed. Wendover describes crossbowmen and archers sending missiles into the French. He describes iron-peaked galleys or pointed vessels striking ships, men going overboard. English sailors used to see fights pressing the attack. The language is hostile and triumphant, but the sequence has a practical core. Blind, grapple, board, take the men of rank, destroy or scatter the rest. The Histoire gives an even tighter view. The first royalist ship engaged Eustace's vessel. Then two other ships came to help. Eustace's vessel was surrounded on every side. The English attacked with stones and lime until the men aboard could not hold out. Robert of Courtenay and the knights were taken. Eustace had his head cut off. This is where the sources split in the most useful way. Wendover says Richard, the illegitimate son of King John, seized Eustace and cut off his head after rejecting his offer. The Histoire names a mariner, Estienne Trabe, often rendered in later English discussion as Stephen of Winchelsea. It adds that he had long been with Eustace. Those two versions cannot both be treated as a single clean camera shot, so the script should not fake one. What can be said safely is that Eustace was found after a search, offered a large ransom or future loyalty, and was killed on or near the captured ship before the Victory returned to port. The exact hand that struck the blow differs by source. The existence of the execution does not. The reason the execution matters is not the violence by itself. Medieval war killed many people without becoming a case. Eustace's death mattered because he was not just another man on the deck. He was the link between a French army in London and the Channel route that could sustain it. A pirate could change sides. A captured ship could be replaced. A commander who knew every harbor between Calais and Dover could not be replaced quickly in the last week of August. The head became a message. The Histoire says Eustace's head was fixed on a lance and carried to Canterbury and through the country to be shown. That detail is not only cruelty, it is communication. The Royalists did not just need Louis weakened, they needed England to see that the sea route had broken. At this point, the case turns. Before the battle, the question is whether the French convoy reaches London. After the battle, the question is what Louis can still bargain with. The answer was less than before. Louis still had London, but he no longer had the route that made London useful. The Histoire says news reached London late on Saturday evening, and that Louis was deeply angered. Roger says Louis was more troubled by this loss than by Lincoln. Soon afterward, negotiations resumed. The September peace, usually discussed as the Treaty of Lambeth or Kingston, required Louis to abandon his English claim and leave the kingdom. Sandwich did not win the war alone. Lincoln had already broken the land campaign. The reissue of royal authority around Henry III mattered. William Marshall's regency mattered. The papal legate mattered. The barons' calculations mattered. But the battle made one fact unavoidable. Louis could hold London only inside a shrinking cage. This is why the surface story, the pirate beheaded on his own deck, is too small for the case. The sharper story is the political chain. Lincoln cut Louis's prestige on land. Blanche tried to repair the loss by sea. Eustace carried the repair. The Cinque Ports and royal commanders intercepted him. Lyme turned wind into a weapon. Eustace's execution turned a tactical capture into a public signal. After that, Louis negotiated from weakness. The lime pots were not the cause of the peace. They were the small object through which the larger mechanism became visible. Now place the documents beside the legend. Roger of Wendover gives a hostile English monastic account. Eustace is a wicked pirate and traitor. The victory is heaven sent. The English act as instruments of judgment. Matthew Paris copies, expands, illustrates, and sharpens that tradition. The Histoire des ducs de Normandie et des rois d'Angleterre, written close to the events in Anglo-Norman, gives a more compact operational account with different names and numbers. The romance of Eustace the Monk gives a life of tricks, magic, outlawry, and moral ending. The romance opens in a different world from the battle record. Eustace learns necromancy at Toledo. He deals in disguises and reversals. He becomes a figure built for performance. By the time the poem reaches the sea fight, the historical tactic is still visible, but the frame has changed. The powder in the eyes becomes part of a story about evil meeting its end. The documents do not let us erase the legend, they let us sort it. The record gives the convoy, the wind, the lime, the boarding, the capture, the execution, the political aftermath. The legend gives the magical education, the outlaw performance, the moral pattern. Both survive because Eustace was useful to more than one kind of writer. A king needed him as a sea captain. A chronicler needed him as a traitor. A romance poet needed him as a trickster who could be punished. That is the second position I am taking on the record. Eustace did not become famous because he was outside politics. He became memorable because politics kept hiring him and then needed his death to look like justice. Look again at the four turns. He breaks from the monastic identity that gives him his name. He serves or is used by John. He shifts into the French orbit. Captured at Sandwich, he tries to buy his life by offering service back to the English king. Whether every turn is equally documented in the same kind of source is exactly the point. The chronicles do not preserve a stable ideology. They preserve a man whose value lay in transfer. That makes Sandwich different from a simple sea fight. The battle was not only English against French, or royalists against rebels, or sailors against soldiers. It was a fight over who could command the Channel at the moment when command of the Channel could decide command of England. The lime pots show the tactical answer. The lance with the head shows the political answer. The romance shows the memory answer. The same object changes meaning as the case moves. First, lime is ordinary material on an English deck. Then it is a weapon carried by wind. Then it is a chronicle detail repeated across sources. Finally, it is the line between record and legend. Because the rare thing in this case is not that a medieval pirate died violently. Many did. The rare thing is that the documents and the legend stand close enough to compare. We can watch a practical tactic enter three narratives. In one, it is battlefield method. In another, it is proof of English skill and divine favor. In the romance, it becomes the final blindness before punishment. The object is the same. The meaning changes with the writer. That is why the episode should not sell Eustace as a folk outlaw of the sea. That framing belongs to the legend layer and to later habits of making every medieval outlaw into the same familiar shape. The stronger case is on the deck at Sandwich, where the record is specific enough to be uncomfortable. The English did not need Eustace to confess. They did not need a trial. They did not need a clean biography. They needed the convoy stopped, the commander removed, and the news carried inland. The Histoire says the head was carried to Canterbury and through the country. That is not an afterthought. It is the final movement of the battle. The ship returns to harbor. The prisoners are secured. The spoils are gathered. The head travels by road because the victory had to become known to people who never saw the sea. A naval tactic became a political message. The final reading is this: Sandwich was won by ships, sailors, wind, and lime, but it mattered because it broke the last practical bridge between Louis's claim and French reinforcement. Eustace's case did not end when the sword fell. It ended when the lime pots on one deck became proof, in the records, that a hired sea captain could decide a crown and still be remembered as only a pirate. The record kept the tactic. The legend kept the punishment. There is one more reason to keep that line visible. Lime is a humble material. It belongs in building, tanning, ship stores, and rough work near a harbor. In the battle accounts, it becomes evidence of preparation. Someone had it ready. Someone knew the wind could carry it. Someone on the English side understood that a convoy crowded with men and gear could be disabled before it could be conquered. That is a better explanation than romance, because it gives the victory back to the deck. Between them is the case.